Good evening, I'm Jim Lara. On the NewsHour this Tuesday, the lead story, more heat from the bonuses and the bailout of insurance giant AIG. The other news of the day, including good economic news on housing starts, a Paul Salmon report on the government's money to rescue AIG and other companies, a Margaret Warner interview with the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan, a science unit report on new efforts to produce fusion energy, and a book conversation about some earlier outrage at Wall Street.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer is provided by
oil, energy, the environment. Where are the answers? This isn't a liberal or conservative issue. It's a human issue. As an energy company, Chevron has a great responsibility. So we've improved our own energy efficiency 27% since 1992. And now we ask you to join us in one of the most important efforts of our time. Using less. Will you join us? Chevron, human energy.
Grant Thornton
and the National Science Foundation, supporting education and research across all fields of science and engineering.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions and foundations. And
this program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The threats and attacks on and about AIG rattled through Congress today as the Obama administration sought to defend its handling of the insurance giant's rescue. Judy Woodruff has our lead story report.
The cries from congressional Democrats were many today, but the theme was the same: give the money back to the government. New York Senator Charles Schumer took to the floor this morning.
We will take this money back by taxing virtually all of it. So let the recipients of these large and unseemly bonuses be warned. If you don't return it on your own, we'll do it for you.
On the House side, several Democrats called for taxing 100% of any bonuses over $100,000 at companies getting government help. New York Congresswoman Carolyn McCarthy.
100%, as far as I'm concerned, is not even enough. If I could tax them 1,000%, I would tax them 1,000%.
AIG first announced plans for the payments more than a year ago, well before it sought government help. The furor erupted over the weekend when it was revealed the company paid out $165 million as part of the bonus program. Today, Republicans zeroed in on Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner. House Minority Leader John Boehner said Geithner failed to ask the right questions when AIG sought its most recent installment of federal aid.
It was Mr. Geithner in late February said that they had a plan to break up AIG, to sell off the parts, and to solve this problem. But after they reported a $61 billion loss, it was Mr. Geithner who shipped $30 billion more into AIG, and not one word has been said about solving the problem. It's time for the administration to present an exit strategy so that these types of abuses can't happen.
Much of the bonus money went to a division that took huge losses linked to risky mortgages. But company officials have said they need those employees to help undo the damage. In addition, AIG's CEO, Edward Liddy, warned that not paying the bonuses would violate contracts and invite lawsuits. Even so, the Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, charged today something could have been done. He said the administration blew its best chance.
Wouldn't the Treasury and the taxpayer have had more leverage over AIG's executive contracts before providing another $30 billion in tax money for them? Once that money was handed over to AIG, the leverage was lost. That would have been the perfect time to make sure that this didn't happen.
At the White House, Press Secretary Robert Gibbs defended the administration's actions, and Geithner in particular.
Secretary Geithner last week engaged with the CEO of AIG to communicate what we thought were outrageous and unacceptable bonuses. That Secretary Geithner received a commitment to lessen some of the bonuses for senior executives.
As the uproar over AIG enveloped the White House, President Obama today tried to shift the focus back to his governing program. He appealed to Republicans to work with him on the budget.
If certain aspects of this budget people don't think work, provide us some ideas in terms of what you do. Just say no is the right advice to give your teenagers about drugs. It is not an acceptable response to whatever economic policy is proposed by the other party.
For the moment, though, the focus in Washington is to just say no to AIG bonuses. And there's more coming tomorrow when the company's chief executive goes before a congressional committee.
Ray Suarez picks up the story from there.
Now that Congress and the White House are trying to figure out how to get back AIG's bonus money, the question remains, what kind of fallout might there be if the government is successful? We asked Andrew Ross Sorkin of the New York Times. He wrote a column about that question today and is editor of Dealbook, the paper's business blog. And Robert Kuttner, an economics writer and co-editor of the American Prospect magazine. He's also a senior fellow at the Demos, a liberal think tank. Andrew Ross Sorkin, should the government be trying to claw back that money?
Well, I have actually no problem with them clawing back the money per se, but I think it has to be done voluntarily, and I think that that is the big issue here. I didn't make many friends today with this column, which effectively suggested you can't break contracts. And the big issue in this case is I think you have no problem going and saying to these employees, listen, the world has changed, things are different, we'd like you to voluntarily agree. And if you can negotiate, terrific. If you can't, I think there's a real problem with not honoring the contract.
Well, just in case people didn't see that column, let me make you even fewer friends. You wrote, maybe we have to swallow hard and pay up for our own good. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm as offended as the next guy about these bonuses, and there's no question that in light of what's happened, these people don't deserve these bonuses. But I think there is a larger question, which is now we are shareholders of these companies as taxpayers. So when it comes to AIG, we now need and want it to benefit and to succeed. So we need to figure out a way to incentivize people to do that. I'm not suggesting the old bonuses did that, because clearly lots of people left the firm afterwards. But what I am suggesting is that we can't just point all the fingers at this firm and say, listen, we're ripping up the contracts unilaterally. It just doesn't work like that. We unfortunately or unfortunately, we still live in a country that's based on laws.
Robert Kuttner, does that argument convince you?
Not at all. I mean, I think the contract issue is a red herring. First of all, you heard the president's secretary, press secretary, Robert Gibbs, completely give away the argument when he credited Geithner for talking the CEO of AIG, Mr. Liddy, into reducing the bonuses. So if Liddy could be induced to reduce the bonuses, he could have reduced them all the way to zero, and that's not contractual. Furthermore, you've got auto workers who are changing their contracts because they know the future of the company's at stake. You've got workers all over America who've lost their health benefits, their pension benefits. You're possibly going to have an emergency program that revises the terms of mortgages, which are contracts. This is an emergency. And this is a company that has cost the American taxpayer so far $183 billion and counting. So how dare they pay the same people who perpetrated this outrage bonuses? It doesn't pass the smell test. And if the Obama administration doesn't find a way of persuading these guys to give back the bonuses voluntarily, there's going to be a huge groundswell, and Congress is going to do it for them.
Well, Robert Kuttner, earlier today, the CEO of AIG, when asked that same question, said we can't attract and retain the best and brightest talent to lead and staff the company if employees believe their compensation is subject to continued review by the U.S. Treasury.
Yeah, can you imagine that? I mean, the U.S. Treasury, by the way, which is to say the U.S. taxpayers, owns 80% of the company. So it might as well start behaving like an owner. And the best and the brightest, these are the worst and the dumbest. These are the people who took down the whole economy. So as far as I'm concerned, these 300 people in this unit in London that lost tens of billions of dollars that they now want the U.S. taxpayer to make up, far from getting bonuses, they should be sharing a cell with Bernie Madoff. And if the Obama administration doesn't realize that the average American feels that way, then he's going to get on the wrong side of a populist backlash, and the Republicans, who are ordinarily a lot closer to Wall Street, are going to eat his lunch.
Andrew Sorkin, does AIG still need these people?
You know, this is a very tough question, and I don't want to be an apologist for AIG or a sympathizer, because I don't sympathize with these people at all, but I do sympathize with this problem, which is, as taxpayers and shareholders of AIG, we do need it to succeed, as I said before, and that means we need talented people to work there. And frankly, if you know the folks at AIG right now that are working there, they don't want to work there, and you probably don't want to take a job there. And so we have a problem here, because one of the things that's happening at AIG that has to happen over the next year or two as we wind down this firm is we need to, quote, unwind trades. That means that AIG is unwinding trades with a counterparty on the other side. So there's a smart guy on the other side who's going to try to outdo AIG, which is us. And so it would be nice if we had a smart person on our side. And frankly, in this environment, with all of the attention and rhetoric that we're talking about on this program, it's very hard to keep people who are talented in their chairs because nobody wants the job. That's not to suggest you need to pay them $3 million or any of the ridiculous bonuses that have gone out the window so far, but it does mean that we need to figure out a way to make this work.
Bob Kudner?
How can you possibly call somebody who lost $183 billion a smart guy? There are tens of thousands of people all over Wall Street who are smart guys who've lost their jobs, who'd probably be very grateful to take these jobs for maybe $250,000, which is more than 95% of Americans make. This is just astounding that any serious person would defend these bonuses either on grounds of retaining smart people or on grounds that a contract is sacrosanct.
But Bob, Andrew and others have noted that the complexity of the AIG business dealings with its financial products division, which is where most of the money was lost, require somebody with in-house institutional memory to help unravel this, to reel it back so that you can start to dismantle the company without losing your shirt.
You know, I imagine you're a very bright person. I like to think I'm a smart guy. The folks on the NewsHour are all smart people. Unfortunately, I doubt any of us could walk into AIG tomorrow and do this job. And I frankly don't think there's that many people actually out there that have the institutional knowledge to do this. This is very complicated stuff, and frankly so complicated that most of us missed this the first time around.
Bob?
Well, there were some of us who were warning about this the first time around, and there were some people like some of the folks who unfortunately have been appointed to guard the chicken coops who were preventing the same regulatory agencies from regulating derivatives so that this wouldn't have happened in the first place. I'm confident that there are enough smart people in America who could go in and fathom what's going on and unwind these trades. You do not have to keep the same people who perpetrated these outrages on the job on the premise that no one else can understand this. I just don't buy it.
Bob, Andrew Sorkin, you and Robert Kudner agree that a lot of mistakes were made at AIG, but over these past 48 hours, so much attention's been paid to these bonuses, which is a fraction of 1% of the money that the federal government has turned over to AIG, that less attention's being paid to who else got money from AIG, and billions have gone out the door, haven't they?
Yes,
absolutely. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, they've been, yes, and they've gone out the door to other investment banking companies like Goldman and several others, and you know, the bonus question, I think you're right, Ray, is deflecting attention from the bigger question, which is how Treasury is managing this, and instead of transparency, until Congresswoman Maloney, the chair of the Joint Economic Committee, held a hearing last week, Treasury was essentially saying this is proprietary business information. We're not even going to require AIG to tell you who got all the money. Finally, they fessed up. you know, this is being run by the Treasury in the way that J.P. Morgan and company were brought in after the bank panic of 1907. It's being run like a private banker's club instead of like a government agency that owes the taxpayer some transparency and some accountability.
Andrew, it's true that nobody knows who the recipients are yet or has been able to see these contracts, even though, as
well,
Bob
we haven't been able to see the actual
we
haven't been able to see the contracts themselves, but we have been able to see they did disclose a list of firms that have been effectively propped up by this. I mean, one of the things I'm not sure everybody appreciates is the money that's gone into AIG hasn't sat in AIG. It's been distributed tens of billions of dollars to all of these other banks. And one of the reasons that was cited back in September when they gave the first $85 billion and the subsequent bailouts, if you will, was not just about AIG, but really propping up the system. And that's what's been going on. And one of the nerve-wracking things is that it feels like the Fed and the Treasury in this case were trying to obfuscate and not let the public appreciate where this money was going for fear that it would actually put these other firms in jeopardy.
Andrew Ross Sorkin and Robert Kuttner. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
In other news today, there was good word on the housing front, and it sparked a new rally on Wall Street. The Commerce Department reported construction of new homes and apartments surged more than 22% in February. In response, the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained more than 178 points to close above 73.95. The NASDAQ rose 58 points to close at 1462. Caterpillar will cut more jobs as the demand for heavy machinery continues to fall. The company announced plans to lay off more than 2,400 employees at 5 factories across Illinois, Indiana, and Georgia. That's in addition to 22,000 jobs Caterpillar already planned to eliminate. Pope Benedict XVI journeyed to Africa today and denounced the use of condoms to fight the AIDS pandemic. On his flight from Rome, the Pope said sexual abstinence is the best way to stop the disease. He said you can't resolve it with the distribution of condoms. On the contrary, it increases the problem. Later, the pontiff arrived in Cameroon, his first stop on a week-long trip. He's expected to visit charities, talk to Muslim leaders, and meet bishops from across Africa. In Pakistan, judges schooled in Islamic law began hearing cases in a northwest region. A total of 7 religious courts opened in the Swat Valley under a deal to make peace with Taliban militants. The deal also called for a ceasefire, which has generally held since mid-February. On this St. Patrick's Day, President Obama praised U.S.-Irish ties, and he named a new ambassador to Ireland. The nominee is Dan Rooney, owner of the NFL's Pittsburgh Steelers football team. The president also met with Irish Prime Minister Brian Cohen, and he noted his mother's family can be traced back to Ireland. For the occasion, water in the White House fountains was dyed green. It's a nod to tradition in Chicago, the Obama's hometown, where the river is dyed green. And still to come on the NewsHour tonight, Salman on where all that rescue money is coming from, General McKiernan in Afghanistan, the future for fusion energy, and outrage at Wall Street circa 1920. The rescue money source question comes from our economics correspondent, Paul Salman.
Time and again, viewers like you have visited our Q&A website, the Business Desk, and asked the following Q. Where's the government getting all the money, several $1 trillion so far, for all its bailouts and stimuli? Here's the A. The government gets the money 2 ways, as we're about to explain by putting it graphically.
The Treasury Department borrows money, the Federal Reserve creates it. We'll start with the Fed and creationism, and this being PBS, with a bit of history. Once upon a time, money, that most convenient stand-in for value, was itself valuable, often made of precious metals like gold and silver. Rulers minted the metals into coins and stamped them to vouch for their content, a kind of royal housekeeping seal of approval. But with the Industrial Revolution came an explosion of new wealth. The supply of gold and silver couldn't keep up. That shackled the trading of wealth and thus economic growth. So folks came up with paper money, printed promises issued by rulers or rich merchants or banks, redeemable for something precious like gold or silver.
In fact, the U.S. government issued gold certificates from the 1880s to the 1930s. And as recently as the 1960s, all $1 bills and most 5s and 10s were silver certificates, payable to the bearer on demand.
Until recently, few wanted to meddle with the metal.
These are called gold eagles.
Preferring to trust the paper. After all, it's a real hassle to store the shiny stuff, as we learned on a recent visit to a gold and silver dealer in Oakland, California.
I've had people come in and they say, I want to buy 10, 20, 40 ounces of gold, and they take it away, and I tell them, don't think you can hide it in the freezer because crooks know to look there. Oh no, I'm going to go put it in my safe deposit box. If the bank goes belly up, how do you get into your safe deposit box to get your gold that you bought to protect yourself from all this stuff?
So Charlie Mimoser's customers wind up spending their energy on camouflage.
Well, I had a customer, he had some 1,000-ounce silver bars, and what he did is he spray painted them black and he would use them as doorstops in his house. You walk right by it, never know what it was.
No wonder the less enterprising among us put our trust in Uncle Sam's money. But here's a source of confusion when it comes to that money. It's not paper that the Fed creates when it makes the new money for its bailouts and the like. Relying on this oldly minted footage, as we TV folks do, to visualize dollars, we tend to mislead folks. In fact, there's only $1 trillion or so worth of bills and coins out there at the moment, worldwide. Pretty much the same amount there was last year. But there's another $1 trillion or so worth of Federal Reserves in the banking system, most of which have been created in the past 12 months. We'd interviewed economist David Weiss recently at New York's Central Park Zoo, discussing the extent to which bearish psychology, a form of what's called animal spirits, has played a role in the bath we're all taking. We also asked Weiss, what's a Federal Reserve?
All it really is an electronic transfer into the bank account. And if they want to buy mortgage-backed securities, all you do is send an electronic signal to the bank and get the securities in exchange.
And then the bank has that amount on deposit from the Fed.
That's what federal funds are. The Fed creates money. That's its job. That's a central bank's job.
But what's the difference between minted money and Federal Reserves? We asked economist Simon Johnson.
It's quite funny. The Federal Reserve insists absolutely categorically we do not print money. That's the U.S. Mint that prints money. But of course the Fed issues money. It's a great deal, right? Instead of having to print it on a printing press, you just do it digitally. It doesn't actually cost you anything, hardly anything, to issue these new digits, these new bits of code on a computer somewhere.
In other words, these Federal Reserves or federal funds are just digital promises, computer blips. Not cash, but just as good. No different than the money in your checking account.
So the Fed is creating money, even if it's not minting it. Something like 600 billion new electronic dollars in the past year. But that's not the only way the government is coming up with money to try to quell the crisis.
It's also been borrowing money from investors all over the world.
That great big sucking sound you hear out there is global capital coming into our markets.
We caught up with economist Ed Yardeni at an investment breakfast a while ago.
We're talking about investors around the world that are now focusing on the return of their capital than the return on their capital. They want their money back, and apparently they feel that the U.S. government is the best place to park their money right now.
By U.S. government, Ed Yardeni means not the Fed, but the Treasury, which collects taxes and, if they fall short of federal expenses, borrows to make up the difference by selling its Treasury bills, notes, and bonds to investors. Usually, the more it borrows, the higher the interest rate it has to pay to keep lenders lending. But investors have been so safety conscious of late, they've been willing to take almost no interest at all to stow their dough in Treasuries.
So the world's and America's investors are lending the government all this money.
That's right. It's a very perverse situation. It's really benefiting the United States. It's certainly easy to argue that we started this mess in the first place with all of our excesses, and you would think that foreigners would say, you know, a curse on you. We don't want to invest in the United States anymore. Of quite the opposite. They're saying, take all of our money, and you don't even have to pay us anything. Just put it in Treasury bills and do whatever you want with it. Just make sure we get it back. And as a result, that's created this enormous benefit for us.
The Treasury has borrowed $1.5 trillion in just the past year to cover both its annual revenue shortfall, the budget deficit, and the TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, not including the newly passed stimulus, which will require another $800 billion or so, and other new Fed programs. But add it all together, and you've got a couple of trillion at least in new Treasury borrowing, and some $600 billion in new Fed money thus far.
So that's where the money comes from. But it raises a new and pressing concern. With all this printing and borrowing, might there be too much money in circulation, risking inflation? That's worrying folks at the moment, both left and right.
Bob Samuelson, author of The Great Inflation and Its Aftermath, is sometimes thought of as conservative.
The Fed is clearly pumping huge amounts of money into the financial system to prevent a panic, to provide liquidity for institutions who need it. And there is a danger that if they pump too much in, the ultimate consequence will be inflation, which they don't want.
Former Nixon aide Kevin Phillips, proud author of Bad Money, is now decidedly liberal.
You have the government spending these huge amounts of money in commitments they're making to bail everything out. It's all the money that's being given to the investment banks and banks that are in trouble at almost negligible cost, and they are allowed to come in and basically bring in a piece of some instrument that's almost worthless, and they get real money insofar as our money is real money for that.
The more the Fed does this, the more dollars out there, eventually raising the fear of hyperinflation. A 500 billion dinar note from the former Yugoslavia, famous photos from 1920s Germany.
Bales of bills of so little value, people began using them to warm the house or go fly a kite. It's happening in Zimbabwe today. Money literally not worth the paper it's printed on. And so, if too much money is borrowed and printed in the U.S.,
the dollar becomes effectively worthless. You see a hyperinflation.
Economist John Williams advises clients and runs the website shadowstats.com, which contrasts his statistics with those of the government. He's worried that even our borrowing will have to be covered with new dollars.
There's a tremendous amount of dollars being held by foreign investors. And if the foreign investors get to the point of dumping those dollars, the Fed's got to step in and intervene and start buying up the federal debt to keep the system from collapsing.
Which would mean the Fed creating more electronic money. But right now, there's too little money out there because everyone's afraid to spend or lend. Again, David Weiss.
When people take their money home, shove it under their mattress, that basically is removing money from circulation. The Fed has to replace it.
Has to replace it to keep the economy from shrinking. And that's why the Treasury is borrowing so much, and, says Simon Johnson,
the Fed shoveling money in with a very big shovel right now, and they're making a calculation that this is the amount of money that sort of balances the system. You don't get a lot of inflation. In fact, anything prices are tending to fall, we're tending to get deflation. But this could turn very, very quickly, and all of a sudden there's all that money out there, and that's what people are worried about.
People like Charlie Mimoser and his customers like John Williams.
I buy coins. I prefer gold coins as a hedge against inflation, because long-term we have a terrible inflation problem ahead of us.
Long-term, maybe we do, maybe we don't. Short-term, though, we've got deflation, which is why the government is both printing and borrowing money right now to try to get the economy up and running once again.
Now, an interview with U.S. Army General David McKiernan, the top American and NATO commander in Afghanistan. Margaret Warner talked with him Sunday at his headquarters.
General McKiernan, thanks for having us. Do you think the war is winnable in military terms?
Well, the war is winnable. Let's not put it in military terms, because it's going to take security, it's going to take governance, and it's going to take socioeconomic progress, all three of those in a comprehensive way. But this campaign is absolutely winnable and will be won.
Are you seeing a greater presence or activity by al-Qaeda? The head of the Defense Intelligence Agency last week said so in Congress. I'm just wondering if you see it, where do you see it here?
I'm not seeing a greater presence of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, but we do know that al-Qaeda provides facilitators, provides trainers, provides resources that assist different insurgent groups inside of Afghanistan.
And is that to a greater degree than recently?
I don't see any increase in it, but it is persistent.
The Taliban seems to have, or this sort of, you call it an extremist syndicate, I think, such control in certain areas that, for instance, a foreigner can't go on the Kabul to Kandahar road safely anymore. As I mentioned, we were in Helmand province and last week, and the State Department reconstruction team really couldn't get out of its British garrison virtually. Are 17,000 more troops enough to turn that sort of thing around?
Well, let's be very clear. The 17,000 soldiers and Marines that the President recently approved are generally going to be positioned in the southern and southwestern part of Afghanistan. That's the area where I've described that we're in a stalemate, that we're not increasing security, we're not increasing freedom of movement, yet the insurgency is not increasing their control either, but we're in a stalemate. We need additional security presence in the south to break that stalemate and set a foundation where governance and reconstruction and development can improve. Those are U.S. forces to reinforce our effort in the South.
Now, are more U.S. troops going to necessarily mean more casualties on both sides and for civilians?
That's a hard thing to make a general statement that more forces equal more casualties. I think in areas where we do have some security presence and we're going to reinforce that presence, that's not necessarily going to be the case. In other areas where we're going to have a security presence where we have not been before, then there might be an initial period where casualties, Taliban or other insurgent groups, does spike until we get to a certain point where it should reduce and then level out.
Just because there'll be more action, there'll be more engagement.
Because it'll be areas that we have not previously had a security presence in. And so we would expect there will be initially resistance on the part of those that don't want us there, whether it's Taliban, whether it's narco criminals, whether it's other sorts of criminal activity.
It won't come as a surprise to you to know that also Afghans have been complaining to us about civilian casualties. That's a real bone of controversy. Have you adjusted tactics at all recently to minimize those casualties? And if so, how?
Well, first, let's be very clear on the issue of civilian casualties. We keep a very detailed accounting of every allegation of civilian casualties in this country, no matter where it's reported from, and then we go out and investigate it. We show that about 80% of civilian casualties in Afghanistan are caused by the insurgent, a fact that is not well publicized sometimes, 80%. In the cases where there's loss of civilian life that involves actions with ISAF or U.S. forces, first of all, it's a tragic occurrence that nobody wants. We do everything we can to avoid that. We do have procedures in place for our tactical units to exercise good judgment, proportionality, to try to make sure that escalation of the use of lethal force is appropriate. But at the end of the day, we place judgment, we place great faith on the judgment of our junior leaders, and they do an incredible job. But everyone needs to remember that by the very nature of an insurgency, the threat, the enemy mixes in on purpose with the civilian population.
But can you confirm reports that after President Karzai spoke to you all about this, that you have minimized the number of night special forces raids, for example, or the kinds of operations that might lead to the need to call in air support?
No, I wouldn't say we've limited the pace of our operations. We have an absolute desire to make all these operations driven by good intelligence. We try to partner with Afghan security forces whenever and wherever possible. If it involves having to go into an Afghan house in the middle of the night or search Afghans, all of us, we would much rather have Afghans doing those house entries and searches. In some cases, that's not possible because the capacity and the capability doesn't yet exist in this country. But wherever possible, we try to do that.
No matter how effective you are here and with the additional forces, can you really achieve what you want if Pakistan and the Pakistani military and intelligence don't restrain the insurgent leadership, the Taliban leadership, and foot soldiers that are right on the other side of the border?
Well, this is certainly a regional insurgency. It's certainly a regional problem set. And I've always said that unless there is a resolution of the militant sanctuaries that exist across the border in the tribal areas of Pakistan, it's hard for me to envision a degree of stability and security in this region. So I think that's why there's a regional outlook here. There's a Afghanistan-Pakistan approach to this insurgency.
President Obama and some military leaders, including General Petraeus, have talked about reaching out to moderate, quote-unquote, elements of the Taliban. Yet President Karzai is said to be entertaining communications with Mullah Omar himself. Is the U.S. open to that?
Well, you're asking me a policy question that I don't decide. That's decided in Washington. What I would say, though, is that ISAF and U.S. military as well here favor the idea that if a fighter, if an insurgent wants to lay down their weapon, support the legitimate constitution of Afghanistan, then that probably is a legitimate reconciliation that should be led by the Afghan government, that certainly the military would be supportive of.
But does the U.S. have any red lines in terms of who could be included in these negotiations, who might become part of the government?
I think it's fair to say there's some that we see as perhaps irreconcilable.
Finally, let me ask you, what would you say to Americans who say, or maybe thinking, we're finally getting out of Iraq after many long years. Why do we have to go back to Afghanistan with greater numbers to fight a war we thought we'd already won? What would you say to them?
Well, I'd say I'm not sure we ever should have thought we had won this war. This is the region that sprung al-Qaeda operatives that attacked our country in 2001. Al-Qaeda still exists in this region. If we don't have a successful outcome in Pakistan and Afghanistan, that will allow a terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda to continue to have effects globally. That's why we're still here. As part of that, we are committed to achieving a level of security and stability in the country of Afghanistan.
And how long do you think that will take?
I always hesitate to try to give any prediction on how long it will take. Counterinsurgencies are very difficult, lengthy campaigns. I think we need to stay committed here in Afghanistan for some period of time.
A matter of years.
A matter of years.
General McCarran, thank you.
Thank you.
In her next report, Margaret looks at corruption, drugs, and daily life in Afghanistan. Next tonight, an update on the long quest for fusion energy. NewsHour correspondent Spencer Michaels has our Science Unit report.
Imagine producing energy the same way the sun does, cheaply, cleanly, and infinitely. That's what scientists like Ed Moses at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab in California say they think they can achieve.
Fusion energy is the long-term solution. It is infinite, essentially infinite fuel, and it has no carbon waste.
Using a newly completed $4 billion laser that has been 10 years in the making, Livermore is getting close to producing controlled fusion and perhaps solving most of the nation's energy needs.
This is the largest, highest energy, highest power, most precision, flexible laser that's ever been built. and will be that way for many years.
Moses, who directs Livermore's National Ignition Facility, says the laser is finally ready to start experiments that he believes will lead to ignition.
When we talk about ignition, we talk about making a small sun on Earth, getting thermonuclear burn in the laboratory in a controlled manner.
That burn, or fusion, is what happens in the sun and the stars and in hydrogen bombs. Pieces of mass at the heart of atoms are merged together, fused at very high temperatures, producing enormous amounts of energy, heat and light. Fusion is the opposite of fission, which is used in nuclear power reactors. That's where atoms are broken apart. Fusion is also much cleaner. Sun in a bottle is what science writer Charles Seif calls it.
Basically, all life comes eventually from fusion, from the fusion of the sun. And so if we could replicate this on Earth, we've got the clean elemental power that powers everything on the Earth, essentially.
For 50 years, scientists have tried without success to create fusion by turning matter into energy. That's what Albert Einstein was theorizing about in E = mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared.
He realized that energy and matter are interconvertible. And what happens is when you take two very light elements, two light atoms like hydrogen, and slam them together hard enough, a little mass is converted into energy.
Getting fusion to work in a laboratory is going to be downright tricky. The engineering is unprecedented. The laser light is fed through a series of tubes, split apart several times, steered through amplifiers that bounce it back and forth, eventually boosting its power by 3 billion times. Then the 192 beams are converted into X-rays before focusing on a tiny ball of hydrogen isotopes inside a cylinder the size of a pill. The X-rays heat the hydrogen atoms to millions of degrees, fusing their nuclei. The collision that takes place in this intricate sphere, the target chamber, produces energy as an atomic particle shoots away from the crash site.
It will make energy, as Einstein told us. The neutron will fly off, and if we collect the energy that's coming out of that, we have fusion energy to use for electricity or a variety of other purposes.
The big laser was sold to Congress both as an energy source and as a device that could be used to simulate nuclear explosions, so nuclear weapons could be tested without actually exploding them. 7 years ago, when we first reported on the ignition facility, this project was in jeopardy. It was over budget and behind schedule, and Congress was considering cutting its funding. But a new management team came on board, and today the controversy has mostly died down.
We re-baselined, changed the management structure, pretty dramatically, went through a lot of technical reviews, congressional reviews, and the like.
Whether the facility will actually produce fusion energy in today's energy-starved world remains a subject of debate.
Fusion is damnably hard. I think they've been getting ready to get fusion for 30 years plus. And I think that they've got a tremendously important machine. But is this going to actually produce more energy than the laser consumes? Almost certainly not. And in fact, if you press them, they hedge a little bit. Maybe we'll get ignition, maybe we won't.
Ken Fowler, former Livermore scientist and author of The Fusion Quest, is confident that fusion energy is finally within reach.
Oh, I know it'll work. The issues are economic and the time that's involved in gathering money to do something this large.
Oh, there must be scientific issues as well that have slowed this thing down.
But the scientific issues are now pretty well understood, and that's why we're doing these big machines now.
With such disagreement among experts on fusion's prospects, how are politicians supposed to know what projects to support? Richard Muller teaches a course at the University of California at Berkeley entitled Physics for Future Presidents. He says those who control the purse strings for the ignition facility must understand the science behind producing energy.
These are things the president needs to understand, so we can ask the more subtle questions to his science advisors.
Muller says fusion has a long way to go before it can solve energy shortages.
The lasers are expensive. They can't fire very frequently. Ultimately, what we would want to do is to have lasers fire at a pellet maybe once every second, release this energy every second, and then use that energy to run an electric power plant. We're not there yet. Right now, we have to find a cheap way to do this, a reliable way, and so far, we're just trying to make it work. I think of it as building the first gasoline engine.
But Ed Moses is in it for the long haul.
It is the silver bullet. Of course, there's a lot to do along the way.
He estimates that within a dozen years, pilot fusion power plants that produce more energy than they use will be running. And shortly thereafter, fusion power will be part of our lives.
And finally tonight, a look back at a time when anger at Wall Street turned violent, and to Jeffrey Brown.
Just before noon on September 16, 1920, a horse-drawn cart pulled up near J.P. Morgan Bank's headquarters on Wall Street. The explosion from the dynamite on the wagon killed 38 people and wounded 143 more. Until the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, it was the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil. And yet this attack, coming at a time of enormous social and economic tumult, is little known and little marked in our history books. A new book, The Day Wall Street Exploded, sets about to correct that. Its author is Beverly Gage, an historian at Yale University. Welcome.
Thanks.
So the target seems fairly clear, but in many ways this event is a great unsolved mystery.
That's right. The moment this bomb went off, everybody assumed that it had been a blow at American capitalism aimed at the Morgan Bank, the New York Stock Exchange, which was just down the street. And they assumed it had been radicals of some sort who had set the bomb, probably anarchists or communists. But there was a 4-year investigation into it, and they actually never ended up solving the crime at all.
No huge investigation, no indictments, no trials. What's the thinking on who did it and why?
Right. Well, you had the Federal Bureau of Investigation involved. You had the New York Police Department involved. You had private detectives all over the country involved. They all tripped over each other trying to figure this out. And as we said, they failed. Probably the best theory is that it was an Italian anarchist who was part of the same circle of anarchists that Sacco and Vanzetti, the famous defendants, were involved with, and that this was set in part in response to their arrests, but also to the enormous repression and battles over capitalism that were underway.
Yeah, now that's what I want to ask you about, because this was a time of incredible tumult. You write actually early on in the book, and questions about the very future of capitalism. You write, millions of people around the globe believe that capitalism was on the verge of collapse, or at least of transformation. And that included people here in the United States.
Absolutely. 1920 is an incredible year of turmoil, 1919 as well. In some sense, this is a battle that had been going on for at least 50 years as industrial capitalism was on the rise, as you had the great robber barons of the age sort of coming into their own, J.P. Morgan most notably. But in particular, in 1919, 1920, you had a real explosion, if you'll let me use the word, of unrest in the United States, partly inspired by the Bolshevik Revolution abroad, which had just happened in 1917, some of the unrest from World War I. But in 1919, 4 million American workers went out on strike, and a lot of this was happening in the midst of a conversation about, would capitalism survive, or were we all facing an inevitable socialist revolution in the future?
Of course, at the same time, as you say, there was growing American power, economic power and financial power, much of it concentrated in Wall Street.
Absolutely. It's a really funny moment for Wall Street bankers, because on the one hand, they've come out of World War I. They are suddenly the dominant financial power in the world. The United States is a creditor nation for the first time, and so the future looks incredibly bright, but they also feel really vulnerable because they're under attack and under criticism from all quarters, and sometimes quite literally, as in the Wall Street bombing.
And what, of course, is especially interesting now and newly relevant is to think back that a lot of that ended up in violence, in terrorism. We forget a lot of that.
Absolutely. One of the things in 2009 that's really striking about the Wall Street bombing is that it hits at this intersection of two themes that are so much a part of our own politics. Terrorism on the one hand, in particular terrorism in New York and downtown, and then on the other hand, these questions about Wall Street. These really fused, they came together in this moment of pretty dramatic violence.
Well, it is impossible to think about this without, let's start with 9/11. Obvious ties to 9/11. What parallels do you see? Certainly one area is civil liberties questions that came up then as they've come up since.
Well, it's funny. I started working on this when I was living in New York, but it was a little bit before 9/11. And so the thing that really drew me into it were actually these questions about what it meant in terms of people's debates about capitalism and Wall Street. And then, of course, 9/11 came along, and it raised all sorts of new questions about terrorism, not so much because I was interested in writing about terrorism in the present day, but because it seemed to be so missing from the historical literature. And so much of what I was seeing from the fact that people used the word terrorism to describe what they saw to the sorts of debates that emerged around civil liberties in this moment. You know, you're going to treat a crime like this as a criminal act, or are you going to treat it as something part of a much broader ideological or even military struggle? And these same civil liberties debates really came out of this moment. In fact, two of the organizations that still dominate this debate, the ACLU on the one hand and the FBI on the other, both had their origins in this period around World War I.
Really? So you can trace much of that back to this time?
Absolutely.
Of course, the other way that it hits us now is you know, the very immediate moment is the resentments against Wall Street.
Right, right.
Now, when you started, as you said, that wasn't really there. I mean, there were bubbles, and there were bubbles crashing, perhaps, but not like what we've seen in the last month or so.
Yeah, no, I started this actually sort of at the height of the dot-com boom. And so what was really striking, I mean, that was a moment when American capitalism was triumphant, the Soviet Union had fallen, and there seemed to be a real consensus around economic questions. And so the past looked very different in that context. Now, in some sense, we've come, I wouldn't say full circle, but certainly the phrase "the day Wall Street exploded" has a very different meaning today than it did when I started out. But still, I think the most striking thing is just how different this moment in the early 20th century looks from the present day. I mean, this was a moment when you had millions of people out marching in the streets. You had incredible levels of violence all around these economic questions. And today, I think it really, by contrast, makes our current debates, though they can be very fractious, they're much more limited range of debate underway.
Are there, even with those dissimilarities, I think that's the word, are there lessons? You're a historian. Are there lessons in looking back that help us today?
Right. Well, absolutely. I think we don't want to forget that Wall Street has actually been subject to a lot of controversy throughout its time. I mean, it's mostly done pretty well and has mostly survived, but there is something of a cautionary note in the tale. I mean, a lot of what this book is about groups of people who found themselves so frustrated at their inability to express their grievances in other ways that they turned to violence in the end.
And one last thing. Why, you write about how this was much forgotten. Why do we forget these things? Why was this episode forgotten?
Right. Well, it's funny. I mean, that was one of the things that interested me from the first, was simply the fact that I hadn't heard of this. It seems so dramatic. 38 people killed in the middle of the financial district. And I think that there are a couple of reasons that it's been forgotten. Some of it has to do with the fact that there wasn't any big show trial, and that makes the story a little more truncated. Wall Street itself didn't really want to remember. I mean, they came in, they cleaned up, they reopened the markets the next day, and they never held an anniversary celebration, and they never put up a memorial. But I think it's also something of a, I guess, a failure of the imagination, that it's actually really hard 100 years later to remember a moment when people were thinking there might actually be a revolution in the United States.
All right. The book is The Day Wall Street Exploded. Beverly Gage, thanks very much.
Thanks, Jeff.
And again, the major developments of this day: congressional Democrats pressed for ways to recover bonuses paid at insurance giant AIG, and Republicans criticized the Obama administration for its handling of that issue. Wall Street rallied after the government reported construction of new homes and apartments surged in January, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 178 points. A reminder, you can find us online at our new one-stop address, newshour.pbs.org. Tonight, you can ask Paul Salmon about AIG and all things economic at the business desk. Learn more about fusion energy on our science site, and listen to a reporter's podcast on the tensions on the Korean Peninsula after North Korea announced plans to launch a rocket. The NewsHour is available always, whenever you want it, at NewsHour www.pbs.org. And we'll see you there online and again here tomorrow evening. I'm Jim Lara. Thank you and good night.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lara is provided by...
The world is changing, and how we use energy today cannot be how we use it tomorrow. There is no one solution. It's not simply more oil, more renewables, or being more efficient. It's all of it. Our way of life depends on developing all forms of energy and to use less of it. It's time to put our differences aside. Will you be part of the solution? Chevron, human energy.
Grant Thornton.
The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, working to solve social and environmental problems at home and around the world.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions and foundations. And
this program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Investigate the state of Earth's oceans. Matt Damon hosts Journey to Planet Earth, tomorrow night at 8.
We are PBS.
Atia Brothers, a magazine with the Better Homes and Gardens collection, now at Walmart. Discover the entire line of Better Homes and Gardens furnishings, all at the Walmart price. A new look costs less at Walmart. Save money, live better, Walmart.
I've had asthma forever.
I've had asthma for as long as I can remember.
10 years. I used to wonder why my medicine wouldn't help prevent my symptoms from coming back.
I just figured it couldn't get any better.
And then I found out something I didn't know. I found out there are two main causes of asthma symptoms. Airway constriction you feel, and inflammation you may not. Most medicines don't treat both. So, my doctor prescribed Advair. Advair treats both main causes to help prevent symptoms in the first place.
Advair contains salmeterol. Salmeterol may increase the chance of asthma-related death, so Advair is not for asthma that's well controlled on another controller medicine. Advair will not replace fast-acting inhalers for sudden symptoms and should not be taken more than twice a day. Talk to your doctor about the risks and benefits of Advair. If you take Advair, see your doctor if your asthma does not improve or gets worse.
If you're still having symptoms, ask your doctor how to help prevent them with Advair.
Find out how to get your first full prescription free at Advair.com.
Advair. Now you know.
Leif's Auto Collision, guaranteed delivery date.